Hi everybody, it's Krish Kandoya here and welcome to another edition of FAQ, Faith and Quarantine. And I want to think about learning to pray in lockdown. This might be useful to you because you're not sure how to pray at all, and so the focus is on learning to pray. And maybe it's possible you're a Christian and you're figuring out, how do I do prayers now that I'm in lockdown? Maybe that's more for you. Whoever you are, wherever you are very welcome. I'd love you to like and share this to let other people know that this is useful to you. So make the most of that. My friend Joe Wicks, I don't know him personally. I just watch him every day with my kids to start off our workout. Our Joe Wicks workout, which is harder to say than you think, tells us to do a virtual high five by liking and sharing. Well, if you could do that, that would be fantastic. And I want to start today by talking about dealing with anxiety. Many people are recognizing that this COVID crisis is a health crisis, but also a mental health crisis. Now hear this, I am a doctor, but I'm a doctor of theology, not of medicine, not of psychology. So I don't come to you with professional expertise about mental health. But I do want to share with you some insights the Bible gives us from thousands of years ago about how we can and how Christians have through the generations dealt with some massive issues. And so that's my ambition today. Last week we looked at a series looking at leadership and we drew on the life of David. And so this week I'm going to take 5 songs that David wrote that are ancient songs that could inspire us. They're from a book of the Bible called the Psalms, and the Psalms are a unique book. They're just a wonderful gift. And if you have a Bible, basically open it up almost in the middle. It's like the central pages of the Bible are these songs that God gave to his people that they might sing back to him. And it's an interesting relationship these Psalms have to faith, because sometimes you just don't know what to say to God. And so God gives you some words, not to say use these as rote. They're more like examples to train us about the kinds of things that we can say to God. So if you are someone who's never felt comfortable praying, not quite knowing what to say, sometimes repeating these Psalms, speaking them up to God is God's gift. They're like permission giving and habit forming words that will help us have the right things to say to God. But what's also amazing about them is that they are a gift to us, that God speaks to us through these words. And I've been reading an interesting book which is written by the author. They're a series of short stories written by the author whose short story inspired the film Arrival. And it talks about the power of language to shape our thinking. They're amazing stories. And there is something powerful that language shapes the way that we not just say things, but we actually speak and understand the world. Someone once said it to me that, and I don't know if this is true, I should have checked it out before we started, that the Eskimos have lots of different words to describe snow, and that their language forms the way they think about the environment they're in. It becomes a lens through which we understand the world. If you are bilingual, you know that sometimes things can only be expressed in one language and can't really be expressed in another. And speaking another language reboots and reformats your brain. And the Psalms can do that for us with God. They can help us to rethink and reorientate our relationship with God. And so I hope these Psalms are useful to you. I'm going to start with Psalm 55, which is a really powerful psalm. And it's a very honest one, written by David, and I'm going to read it to you. It's a little bit stream of consciousness, which means it's a little bit all over the place, and I think it relates to how David was feeling at the time. So I'm going to read you bits of it, make some comments, and then hopefully make some general comments when we get to the end. So Psalm 55. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. So this is a request to God that God would listen to his prayer. It sounds like a desperate call for help. Lord, you need to listen to this. I'm out of my depth. Don't ignore me. Now, interesting, isn't it, that God would give permission for people to pray a prayer asking God to listen to them, and almost a prayer of complaint that they feel like God has ignored them. Maybe we're supposed to understand that sometimes you go through that experience of feeling like God is a long way away. That will come up in another psalm we'll look at later in this week. But God is permissioning people to speak honestly to him and to ask to be heard. Here's the bit I thought that might be helpful to many of us in the middle of this coronavirus. My thoughts trouble me and I am distraught. There's something about the internal language or dialogue that David is having. His words are proving offensive to him. They're worrying to him. And it turns out this coronavirus, meaning many of us are locked in, many of us are isolated, we're feeling lonely, and we don't have enough people to talk to. So sometimes our own thought life is troubling to us. And in one sense, the fact that David says this David was the king of Israel at the time. He was the anointed one. He had had oil poured on his head to say that God was with him and the Holy Spirit was with him. And yet he still recognizes that his thoughts are troubling. We often say in the world of mental health recently, it's okay not to be okay. There's been permission given recently, thanks to some of our royal families, some of our sports stars, that it's beginning to be socially acceptable to talk about the struggles that we're having with our mental health. And thousands of years ago, this permission was already given in the Psalms. It's okay not to be okay. And in fact, for David, it's okay not to be okay with God. There is something, some people think it's unspiritual, or, you're not really very mature as a believer if you're still struggling with difficult or distressing thoughts. Well, hang on. God has inspired in the Bible someone to be very open about the fact that their thoughts trouble them and they are distraught. In David's circumstances, there were some social issues that were driving that. My thoughts trouble me, I am distraught at the voice of the enemy, at the stares of the wicked, for they bring down suffering upon me and revile me in their anger. David had some challenges as a leader. He was constantly criticized. There were people that would snipe at him. Unusually for David, this is not a situation where his life is in danger, because he's worried about the voice and stares and how people speak badly against them. Not someone's coming to kill me. That may pop up in a minute, but words are hard. I remember people used to say to me, or my mum used to say to me when I was at school, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words would never harm me. That's not actually true. Words have a power to get under our skin, and therefore they can cause us all sorts of distress. That was what David was wrestling with, though, the thoughts and stares and words of his enemies. But listen to him go on about how he's feeling. Verse 4, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I know many people are struggling with the numbers that are broadcast every day of the number of infections around the world, or the number of deaths. And it's causing people to have all sorts of trouble sleeping. Many people talk about elevated heart rates, or just this constant sense of anxiety. Well, David says, well, I'm feeling that. Horror has overwhelmed me. This is a very honest prayer. I don't know how often you hear a prayer like that in church. I once went to a church where they told me that I couldn't choose any sad songs because you need to come to church to feel uplifted. Well, actually, David is not speaking in an uplifting way. He's speaking in an honest way. Christians don't have to smile all the time. There was a bumper sticker, only talk show hosts smile all the time. There's that fake smile. And many people think that's what Christian spirituality is. It's just pretending everything's okay when it's not. That is not the message of this psalm. He's talking about anguish in his heart, terror in his head, and fear and trembling. His body is trembling because he's so worried. And so David says, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, verse 6. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. David is looking for an exit. And he wishes he had the wings of a dove, but he can't. He's trapped in his circumstances. He longs to be elsewhere. Maybe that's your situation. You're in lockdown. Maybe you're in lockdown in a difficult situation. Oh, that you had the wings of a dove to escape. Maybe you can relate to these words. Maybe praying these words up to God will give you a sense of empathy that God understands, as David understands too. And now a prayer. Confuse the wicked, O Lord. Confound their speech, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. David sees problems everywhere he's looking, and he can't get away from it. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. Verse 13, but is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship, as we walked with the throng at the house of God. At the heart of David's turmoil is a falling out, a friendship that used to be close and now has become enmity. That's what's really troubling him, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And verse 15, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the grave, for evil finds lodging among them. This is almost a curse on his enemies. And again, are you allowed to pray like that to God? Maybe there's some sense of catharsis. David is praying for God to intervene and sort this thing out. Even that is a prayer of faith. Rather than David saying, I'm going to go down and shoot my enemy or punch him or kick him to death, he's asking God to intervene on his behalf, and therefore he's kind of entrusting God to do the right thing rather than for him to enact it himself. Verse 16, but I call to God and the Lord saves me. Evening and morning and noon I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He ransoms me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned forever, will hear them and afflict them, men who never change their ways and have no fear of God. This is not a momentary thought for David. He says evening, morning and noon. This is a continual cycle for the day for David. He can't escape these thoughts, and yet he's still lifting them up to God. And prayer isn't something that you have to do in set times or in set places. It's something you can do anywhere and all the time, however you're feeling. And David presents this to God and is trying to trust God despite his own circumstances, feeling so hard pressed and hard done by. Verse 20, my companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His speech is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. This duplicity that he seems to be kind, his former friend and now enemy, and yet he's still causing trouble. He speaks well, but there are underlying false motives. Maybe you've seen that and no one else seems to see it. David can feel that duplicity in this friend, now enemy. But he ends in a kind of a word of hope. Cast your cares on the Lord, verse 22, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. But you, O God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of corruption. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men will not live out half their days. But as for me, I trust in you. There doesn't seem to be a clear structure to this psalm. David is very up and then very down. He talks about the anxiety and the distress of his thoughts, and then the next moment he's saying that God will come through. He's perplexed and feels like God is far away, and yet he still feels that God will come through. Maybe that's the nature of prayer. It isn't all just one emotion all the time, always full of grace and wonder. Maybe it's a constant conversation, almost a battle with our thoughts. And David is expressing that. And I wonder if that last verse, but as for me, I trust in you, that's David speaking to himself, is telling himself how he wants to behave to God. I try to run every now and again. I'm pretty rubbish at it. But if you come near me, you might hear some words. It's me speaking to myself, telling me to keep on going, not to give up. Come on, keep going. And that seems to be how David is ending this psalm. He's saying, look, but as for me, I will trust in you. He's telling his soul how he wants to behave towards God. And that's a really difficult thing to maintain. But he's speaking life and truth into himself. Friends, as you think about your own response to God, your own prayer life, I think there are some lessons we can draw from the life of David. First of all, it's okay not to be okay with God. We can speak these things to God and not be embarrassed. We're permission to say that. That it's okay to have some pretty dark thoughts, but we can actually let God into them and ask for his help to deal with them. That actually Praying to God, however we're feeling, is permissioned by the Bible. Even if we're like David, fearing fear and trembling and anxiety, we can still lift them up to God. And it's not immature to feel like that. It's real and realistic that we can express these things to God, because even David, the king, the anointed king of Israel, was able to express that to God too. Friends, I wonder if that wrestle with this difficult psalm has helped you. If it has, please like and share this and let other people know. Or maybe there are questions that have come up. Well, please leave them in the comments. Or maybe you're still wrestling. Well, here's a little exercise you might try. Why not take this psalm and speak it out to God? You might want to change some of the words so they reflect your circumstances. But I hope it gives you permission to speak honestly and authentically with God. And maybe these words will give you some solace and help. Thanks again for listening. Join me again tomorrow for the next edition of Faith and Quarantine. Thanks.